Hey everyone, Jen here, and today we are going to be going over how to box the corners of an in the hoop center zip bag. So I used the Quilted Center Zip bag. So you can see here, here's the quilted back. Here is the liner. So the bag is already constructed. We have a video on that. And I'll link that below that you can watch before we get to this point. So you're at the end stage. Nothing is cut down yet. So a lot of people are always interested how I box my bags. So I'm going to show you a couple of my tips and tricks. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where the liner opening is. Now, depending on which bag you use, you may have to extend your, or actually not extend, you need to make it smaller, the turn hole opening, depending on how much you want to box your corners. So on larger bags, I tend to do 2-inch corners. And on this bag, which is 8 by 12, I'm going to do, 1.5 inches. So when you use your template, which I have a ruler, it's by Always Expect More, MOORE.com. It's her boxed bag template. You can also look up, it says CarolinaMorePatterns.com. And this helps do the triangles for bags and boxing of the corners. So I'm going to line up my 1.5 here and my 1.5 there. So you can see my turn hole is right here. So I have about 1.5 inches leeway. So that's good. You can use, this ruler is nice. You can use a rotary cutter and get a nice clean edge here. I am not going to do that because I'm afraid that I will ruin this bag, but I do use that on other single layer items. So like if I was cutting vinyl for like a tote bag. Okay, so I'm going to mark each corner at 1.5. So you line up 1.5 on either side, and I'm using just a air erase pen, which is honestly my new favorite thing. It's called Air Erasing by Soline. I got that at my local shop, but I'm sure you can find it online. It's nice and bright and it stays for a while. I find that it marks on a lot of different fabrics. You can see it. Okay, so our 4 corners are marked. Our turn hole is marked. So next up, we're going to do some cutting. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut my turn hole here. So cut there, cut here. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim around the bag first, and then I'm going to go in and cut my corners. Now on this bag, I did use quite a bit of layers. Not everybody's gonna be able to use the amount of interfacing and batting that I used. It's gonna very much depend on your embroidery machine and your sewing machine. So I used 2 layers of 100% cotton batting. And then I also interfaced all my outer pieces with a woven interfacing by Thermo Web. Okay, so let's, again, my machine, it has an adjustable foot. Both of my machines do, so I can go through all of these layers. All right, here's my liner. Trim that off. Trim off the excess and leave the 2 liner pieces. Honestly, I should have left myself a little bit more liner. I didn't think about that, but it's fine. Okay. All right, so this is all trimmed up. There's our turn hole here. So now we're gonna cut out those corners. Again, with that tool, you can use a rotary cutter. If you were making a vinyl unlined bag, that ruler is fantastic. It has little notches for your rotary cutter, and you don't need to do any of this. It's none of these little, you can see I'm cutting the corner there. It really is a good tool. And if you sew, not just embroider, it's well worth it. Okay. This is probably the most scary part of doing this, is because you just made this bag and now you're cutting it to pieces. I promise you it will be okay. All right. You want to make sure you do this before you turn your bag the first time. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay, so we're quickly going to make our binding for the corners. If you don't want to bind your corners, you can use an overcast stitch on your sewing machine, or if you have a serger, you could serge them. You could zigzag them. You could use pinking shears. It's really up to you on how you want to do this. We do have a blog post showing how I did French seams before, which can be tricky for some people. So I am going to just show you a simple binding method, and I do binding at 2 inches. So you'll have lots of wiggle room. So you're going to cut 2. I cut 2, let's see how long these are. 2 strips at about 16 inches. That's plenty for 2 each for each corner. So I'm going to go ahead and iron those in half, and then I'll cut them in half, and we'll have 4 pieces of binding. All right, so we have our 4 pieces of binding here. They're just folded in half and then cut down. And then I went ahead and turned my bag to the liner side. So we're going to close up our liner hole, turn hole, and I'm going to use the seam tape that you've seen me use. It's by Thermoweb. It's called Heat and Bond seam tape. I'll link that below. And you can, since we are doing a combination sewing / in the hoop project, you could just sew this closed, but I find that it's a little wonky sewing closed a turn hole on an in the hoop bag. It doesn't seem to line up correctly in my mind anyway. So I either use this seam tape or I use steam a seam, depending on the bag, or you can hand sew. But if you watched any of my videos for any of these years, you know that I'm not really down with the hand sewing. Even on my stuffies, I don't tend to hand sew any of them. The only downside to this, for me anyway, is that this stuff is really sticky and it loves to stick to my nails and it drives me crazy. Okay. All right. So our turn hole is closed. All right. So now we are going to, I'm going to trim out my zipper here. This is just personal preference, and this bag is for me, so I don't care if I see a tiny bit of stabilizer at the seam. If you are selling these, obviously you want to follow the directions, and you can cut out your zipper during the bag making process. I just feel like, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of floppy, and I knew I was using all of these layers, so I wanted to keep the zipper as stable as possible. Again, this bag's for me, so if there's some stabilizer there, I don't really mind. Okay, and poly mesh is pretty easy to trim pretty close. You just have to be careful not to cut your fabric, because that would be sad. All right, so next up we are going to address the corners. All right, so we have our 4 corners, and you're going to pull out your corner and you're going to line up the seams like so. So your 2 seams here, and then it's a little difficult on an in the hoop bag to straighten out this right here. So you gotta kind of get in there and make sure you're pushing up and your liner down so it lines up. This doesn't really happen on sewing bag patterns, I have found anyway. So, all right. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I do one corner at a time. Okay, so you have it clipped. You're gonna do, if you wanna do them all, you can clip this side as well. All right. And what I do is I baste these together before I do any binding. So I baste at basically like a 1/8 or a 1/4 inch baste at a longer stitch length. And then I check it from the inside. So I'm not going to do this side because we're going to add a strap. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to run this side and baste those together. Okay, so we have our two corners basted. You can see here about a 1/8. Okay, what I like to do is open the zipper. I like to turn this right side out just at the corners to make sure everything looks fine. Okay, and I can see already that there's a little spot here and here at the corner that the fabrics didn't catch because I used a 1/8. So when I do the binding, we're going to sew on the binding and then you'll see that it will catch that little bit of fabric, but otherwise everything looks fine. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this for now and we're going to dress this side. So one of the things I like to do is add a handle or a strap, whatever you want to call it. And everybody always asks me how I put that in the box bag. So this is just a strap, a fabric strap. And I'm just going to cut it down. I made a long one because I knew I was going to make a few more of these. So I'm just going to cut it down to, I don't know, let's do 8 inches. This is an 8 by 12 bag. So make a bunch of this and then you have extra, you have extra. So what you do is you're going to open your corners here and you're going to slide your handle through the corners. Okay, the right side needs to be facing inside and the wrong side facing your liner. So this is my white bobbin thread. Okay, so you're going to take this and you're going to line it up center with your center seam here. Okay, so try to get your strap center as best as you can. And then go ahead and pin this into place. You can also use webbing or some other kind of strap. I just prefer fabric. Okay, and then you're going to do the same on this side. And you can feel the strap on the inside of your bag. So if you want it to be a little loose, you're going to want to give it a little give on the inside. If you want it to be a little tighter, obviously you can pull this tighter. I like mine to have a little room. So I went ahead and gave it some give on the inside. Okay, so that looks centered enough for me. And you can see on the inside there, we have some give. All right, so now I'm going to take this over to my machine and I'm going to baste these two corners. All right, so both of these corners are now basted. You can see we have our excess. Do not trim that until you check the inside, because if you need to seam rip, you want to still have enough in your seam allowance to accommodate a change, okay? All right, so I can see all of my fabric is pretty much caught. There's a little tiny bit which will get caught again when I go in with a deeper seam allowance. I like the handle. It has plenty of room and it is lined up pretty good in my mind, okay? So everything looks good on the outside. So we're gonna go back to the inside here. And you're gonna go ahead and trim off your excess strap there, okay? It's good. All right, so next up is going to be the binding. So now we're ready for the binding. So you're going to go ahead and take your bag and measure the corner here. So the corner that we're going to cover with binding is 3 inches. Then I add 1 inch for either side. So we're going to cut it at 5 inches. So you're going to cut your strips down to 5 inches and then fold in roughly 3/4 of an inch on either side to give yourself a nice clean edge. We have our binding. You're going to go ahead and clean up if you have any stray threads. If there's any weird pieces of fabric, trim this down. Just clean it up. Make sure everything's even. Okay, so you take your binding, you're gonna fold it in half, your two clean raw edges here. And you're gonna take the raw edge, and you're gonna line it up with the edge of your corner here. You're going to clip this on. Like so. So I usually do just the two at a time. And I usually do the fold the same way on both sides. So the fold over is going to be towards like the long side of the bag. And then when you do these, you're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so you're going to go to your machine and you're going to sew a straight line here on both sides. Okay, so straight line here and a straight line here. Okay, so we have both sides in place. Again, this is not a basting stitch. This is a regular sewing stitch locked at the front and back. I'm going to go in and check the inside to make sure everything got caught, and it didn't. So you can see right here that did not get caught. So before I go any further, I'm going to fix that. I'll do that off camera. All right, so we'll pretend that I fixed that. Now, what I realized is that I use so much batting that my binding isn't big enough. It's not big enough as normal. Normally this is plenty, 2 inches is plenty. But because I used so much batting that it's making it really puff out. So I'm gonna go ahead and just trim off some excess here. I'm gonna show you why. Okay, so trim off some of that excess. If only I did that on the right side, I didn't. Make sure I didn't trim anything. Okay, and then I'm going to trim this side down as well. Okay, we get that out of our seam allowance. Okay, so now you're going to take your binding and fold it over. You're going to enclose all of that raw stuff, clip it. You can also use the more traditional bias binding method. I prefer this one. This is way easier to me. Okay, so you're going to clip this and you're going to make sure you have an adequate stitch length, and you're going to go ahead and sew across the top here on both sides. And you will see that on this side. Hopefully it will get caught in the ditch or just past the ditch. So if you want to use coordinating thread, that's, you know, up to you. Okay, so we're going to do that on both sides. Look how nice that looks. And it's almost perfectly in the ditch, which is pretty impressive considering I don't do anything perfectly. So I'm just going to trim off these extra little threads here. I already checked the inside and all the fabric was caught, and as it should be. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and go to the other side here and repeat the process. So we have our binding, and I did it from, this side. Okay. Again, not that it matters, but I mean, you'll just see I don't change my bobbin thread, so the white will be on like the short side. Okay, so maybe it'll look intentional that I did it that way. If somebody's looking that close, well, you know. Okay. Okay, so those are all together. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the machine and baste these on. So those are sewn on. Again, I'm going to trim this down because I did it previously and didn't do the right side. So I'm going to trim some of this bulk off. Right. And then fold this over. Like so. The nice thing too is you can just adjust the size of your binding if you need more room, or if you just like a bigger binding, that's fine too. It's just kind of a rough, you saw how I measured it out, so it's a rough guess. All right, let's go sew it. All right, so we have this all sewn up. I'm just gonna trim off these excess threads here. Okay, looks good. All right, it's like the final reveal here. So again, there's our nice, clean corners. Flip it right side out. Grab my turning tool and push these corners out really nice. Again, this is like multiple layers of fabrics and interfacing, so it's not going to be as crisp as single layer, but still very nice. Okay, make sure all of our, so here's the interior, and we're going to zip it up. If you have a pressing ham, you could press this, which I'm probably going to because I like my stuff pressed. So I'm going to press my corners, but here it is. Here is our strap, bottom, closed all up. Looks great. Thanks for watching.